President of the European Parliament since July 2019, David Sassoli has an important background as a TV journalist. A familiar face to the Italian public, the Social Democrat decided to switch to European politics in 2009. During his time as an MEP, he focused his activity on relevant topics such as migration. We met him in Brussels at the European Parliament at a crucial moment for Europe. Mr. President, thank you for being with us. We're at a critical juncture where the European Commission's delayed the beginning of its mandate due to the rejection by the European Parliament of 3 of the nominated commissioners. We're witnessing an unusual confrontation between these two institutions.
Well, let's say that Parliament has taken its role seriously. Many candidates have been vetted and approved. 3 candidates were rejected, and now they've been replaced. So far, we have delayed the process by 1 month. It's not that much, but we need to start the legislature and allow the European Commission to work. I can say that with a bit of optimism, they'll be able to start their mandate on the 1st of December.
But this situation has created a stalemate. The institution activities are on standby. And all of this is perceived by European citizens as a confusing situation due perhaps to power games.
Why? The Parliament does its job. This isn't a power game. It's an act of transparency and democracy. It was all transparent. The examination of possible conflicts of interest and the hearings took place publicly. When institutions take their responsibilities seriously, they represent the citizens' interests.
The distance between the European institutions and the citizens is one of the main themes used by Eurosceptics. We see populists surging in many countries. In the Spanish election, the nationalist Vox party doubled its seats. What's happened? Why are these forces making gains?
They've increased, but they haven't managed to take over the European institutions. During the electoral campaign for the European elections, they said they'd destroy Europe. They said it was better that every country lived on its own. On the contrary, though, citizens haven't said that. Yes, these forces got more consensus in some countries, but in general, the idea that Europe is still the common home is very strong.
However, the European Parliament's decided to quarantine the far-right MEPs. Do you think that isolating a part of Parliament which has been elected by the citizens is a reasonable measure?
It's not an abuse of democracy, it's simply democracy. This is how the Parliament works. There are majorities and minorities. The pro-European parties have decided that nationalists must be kept at bay. Because nationalism is a virus to a Europe that must remain strong and unified.
Speaking about nationalism, Dresden has declared a Nazi emergency. While in Italy, a senator who survived the Holocaust now needs bodyguards because of the threats she's received. Is this a sign European values are in crisis?
No, we're responding to all of this with our values. If we didn't have European values, probably those who threaten the senator would be empowered. Maybe they'd feel stronger. They are isolated because our values make us stronger.
Brexit is a manifestation of this confusion, but also of Eurosceptic feeling. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has recently told Euronews the British have always been part-time Europeans. How would you define them?
This is true. For us, of course, it's painful. We thought we would never get to this point. But we have to respect the decision of the British citizens. Of course, it's better to have an orderly Brexit than a disorderly one. We also said the same to Boris Johnson. An orderly Brexit is the best way for everyone.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, however, that the attitude of the European Union contributed in creating scepticism and thus creating Brexit.
With the referendum on Brexit, they hoped to divide Europe. But in the end, they didn't manage this. Like the nationalists on the continent, who are also supporters of Brexit, they thought that they were going to pull down the European Union. Instead, despite the fact that in the EU we discuss everything, on Brexit there's always been unanimity. This is because we are talking about the protection of a space that must be welcoming for everyone and that can allow everyone to defend their own values and freedoms.
So no mistakes have been made by the European Union?
I don't see any mistakes. We moved ahead with determination to protect the citizens of the European Union. We're also taking care of the British citizens, those who decided to leave us.
US President Donald Trump recently said that other countries like Italy would be much better off without the European Union. Do you think these statements are interference?
I thought that the US administration had changed its attitude towards Europe. I was wrong. Perhaps as their election campaign begins, the United States are showing a tougher stance. I believe that European citizens have chosen and are convinced that they are better off within the Union, where we can protect ourselves better than if we were alone. There is no single issue that European countries can solve on their own, from agriculture to industry to safety and energy. Which issues can European countries solve without the European Union?
Immigration's just one of them.
Migration, foreign policy, defence policy, we can list all the issues that we have.
We've seen, however, that immigration has been a testing ground for European unity. Some member states have refused to accept asylum seekers, others have taken unilateral measures. How do you view the tightening on immigration introduced by the French government?
I think we need to be able to find consensus. Unfortunately, politics is not just the art of imagining solutions. It's also the ability to find consensus to get results. Now, of course, on immigration, we still need to make progress. My belief is that this should be a European problem and not a problem for single member states.
The President-elect of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has promised a new immigration arrangement. Given the internal divisions, given the proven violations of human rights in Libya, is establishing European controlled zones in Libya a viable option?
How is it possible to do it in a war-torn country? The reform of the agreement between Italy and Libya must be done under the supervision of the United Nations. Those refugee camps in Libya should be managed by the United Nations. I believe this would be a great step forward. As far as Europe's concerned, we've seen that some countries, thanks to the trust inspired by the new Italian government, have begun a dialogue in Malta. Other countries have joined in, and I believe that this is a good spirit to build something that is not just on a voluntary basis. We need to have a new European immigration policy.
But do you think there's real political will?
I believe that it's in everyone's interest. Of course, we must put everyone in a position to realise this. There is room for solidarity, not only when it comes to migration. For example, on the issue of defence, in Finland there are 1,200 kilometres of border. A country like Finland, which has less than 6 million inhabitants, has an army of 150,000 people to protect a large border that also works for our security.
Speaking of defence, Turkey's launched an offensive on northern Syria. French President Macron said the situation had caused the brain death of NATO. Is he right?
Since 1953, there have been discussions on a common European defence policy, but very few steps have been taken on it so far. I'd like to see governments commit more to filling this gap and making sure that there is a common defence policy with the power of deterrence that carries out peacekeeping missions under the aegis of the European Union. But at the moment, it's risky to undermine what we currently have while hoping for something that we do not yet have. I think that at this moment, the Atlantic Alliance and NATO are very necessary.
After the European Union's condemnation of this offensive, Turkish President Erdogan threatened Europe with the opening of its borders and flooding it with migrants. Is Europe a hostage of Erdogan?
No, of course. Turkey is a gateway to Europe for the Middle East. There are so many things happening in so many countries. For example, in Lebanon, where there are 1.5 million refugees out of 3 million inhabitants. Regarding the financing of refugee camps on the border with Syria, I think that Europe has played its role. This money isn't given to Erdogan, as nationalist propaganda would have us believe. Money is given to the organisations that manage those camps. But that money is running out, and Erdogan says, I won't spend money on that. So if Europe pays, those camps will continue to protect people. I believe that Europe must do its duty for these people who've escaped from the war and that want to return to their homes.
So what can the EU do to put pressure on Turkey?
We can do it in many ways, focusing on economic sanctions, which I believe are also relevant for Erdogan.
As for Turkey, however, it seems that not all member states follow the same line. Last week, the Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán received the Turkish president with great ceremony. Is Hungary a destabilising factor for European cohesion?
Hungary is a country that's under observation. The European Union has many flaws, but it cares about its democratic model and the rule of law. It is also able to supervise what happens in the internal life of the countries. We've seen it in Hungary, we've seen it in Poland, and we have seen that it has often made its voice heard on other forms of dissent. I believe this is very important, and this is the mission of the European Union.
Speaking of post-Soviet countries, we're in the midst of the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. We know that you were there. There's a picture of you hitting the wall with a hammer.
We were very young, and there was a big celebration. Contemporary Europe was born with the collapse of the Berlin Wall. We are better off now than before this, not worse off, as the nationalists want us to believe. We've reconciled a geographical space with our political values, with democracy and freedom. We always need to pay attention to these processes, but I don't think anyone can say that it was better before. Certainly not those young people who were celebrating at the time. That was a shameful barrier that divided a city, and it was also the symbol of the division of Europe.
Since that fall, Europe has undergone a process of rapid expansion. But now there are fractures between East and West, between North and South. How can Europe move forward in the face of this?
We must not be afraid of politics. Europe is a playfield with its rules and its interests.
So splits don't affect the functioning of Europe?
They're natural. Do you think they don't argue in the United States? We discuss them in our countries, and we'll discuss them in the European Union. Politics is temperament and ambition. There are values and there are also interests. It's natural. The important thing is that it all happens with transparency. This is the strength of the democratic system.
There's been tension between member states regarding the accession talks for northern Macedonia and Albania. For the moment, the European Union has closed its doors. Does this mean the EU's closed itself off?
The vast majority of governments, 25 to be precise, and all the European institutions, the European Parliament, the Commission and the Council have said yes to starting the accession process. There were 3 countries that said no. I believe that they were wrong. I also said this to President Macron when I went to visit him. I hope that this issue can be solved quickly. How can we say no to those who want to be with us? Is it wise to make a choice? I don't think so.
Was a decision taken to support a part of public opinion that believes it's necessary to prioritise strengthening the Union?
I believe that domestic issues always have too much pressure on European issues. National politicians should keep their national issues at bay. They tend to have too much impact at European level.
Do you think the EU's lost its credibility with these countries and all which aspire to join the EU?
No, because I was in Skopje. I met the young people from the universities. I spoke with all of the parliamentary groups. I also gave a speech to the Parliament of Northern Macedonia. And I realised that they understand that we want them. Institutions and governments want them to begin their accession path, and they hope that this will happen in the coming months.
One last question, which makes sense since we talked about the proximity of the European institutions to citizens. Before you became president, you'd expressed the wish that during the cold nights, the European Parliament could open its doors to the many homeless people who are in the streets. In Brussels, it's already cold. There are still many homeless, and you are now the president of the European Parliament. Is this plan feasible?
We want to do 2 things. We're already recovering all the food that is left over at Parliament. Now we need to find ways to open some of Parliament's premises. Of course, we also have to ensure that there is security. We are looking at ways to be useful to the poor people of Brussels, who will find themselves in serious difficulties in the coming months.
Presidente, grazie per essere stato con noi.
Buon lavoro.
Grazie.